Hi, welcome to this week's show. Our guest today is Dave Malenfant, who's Director of Outreach and Partnerships at the Center for Supply Chain Innovation at Texas Christian University. Dave, welcome.
Thank you very much, Tim. Thanks, Maria. And it's a pleasure to be here. Thanks for giving me the opportunity.
You're very welcome. So we've got some interesting topics to get into in detail and some of your kind of personal passions and interests. Before we get down to those, maybe you could tell us a bit about your career story so far.
Yeah, I started. I've been in industry for about 40 years, and most of my entire career was in operations and supply chain. I would say almost all of it's been in supply chain and all the aspects of supply chain. I decided to retire in 2014 and got the excellent opportunity to come here at TCU and help them build the talent of the future in the Center for Supply Chain Innovation. And then maybe later on in our discussion, I'll talk about, how did I get involved with TCU? Because I never went to TCU, of course. I was born and raised in Canada and moved to the United States in '93, and enjoyed an excellent career. But here I am with the ability to give back.
Fantastic. And I think where we're interested in taking this conversation today, I guess, is an area that combines your history and your interests and your background, which is namely around what's happening in industry around technology and digital transformation, things like that. And then also, obviously, with your perspective now from the academia organization side, what's the supply of talent coming into the industry? Is industry geared up with the skills and the structures and this kind of stuff? So I think that kind of sweet spot between industry and talent and academia is a nice one to explore.
We've done quite a lot of, and you'll see through some of our podcasts that we do quite a lot with regards to technology. We talk a lot about tech. But I think that there's a very big missing part here, which is the skills needed to implement technology within an organization. And I think that's what we'd like to talk to you about as well.
Yeah, and I want to, I'm a little bit disturbed about how much people are talking about technology from a digital supply chain. Yeah. And it seems that all we're talking about is blockchain, artificial intelligence, machine learning, and drones. And we're talking about the technology. And it concerns me because technology should be an enabler in a business and not the primary focus. Yeah. And I think what's happening right now in business is that they are so focused on the technology that they're forgetting about the people. And guess what's happening? Their processes are breaking. And so I have to pull back and say it's all about the people, processes, then the technology. Yeah. The people and having the right people in the right place with the right skill sets to build those processes to enable the digitization of the supply chain. Then we can talk about technology. And unfortunately, and I've seen this across the board, it's backwards. And we've got to start fixing that, if you know what I mean.
Completely. I think everything that you read about nowadays, if you Google supply chain or manufacturing, you'll see tons of articles about disruptive technology. You'll see tons of things about different types of tech, with robotics, with AI, cognitive, which is great, which is fantastic. And it really is an exciting time, isn't it, for the industry? Yeah. But where does that leave the people? Is this something that's going to, we talk a lot about, we've had sessions about whether or not tech is going to replace people. That's not necessarily something that's going to happen in the immediate future anyway. So how do people prepare, or how do businesses prepare for technology?
I do not believe in the digital transformation of supply chain that people will be eliminated. I mean, that's just a fallacy. Yeah. But I do think that the skill sets are going to change. Let's take a warehouse operation where we have a lot of pickers. Yes, that's going to change. That probably won't need those pickers. Yeah. But guess what we're going to need? We're going to need analysts and supply chain analysts who are really honed in the skill of data analytics. And so we're seeing this transformation of the skill sets that's going to be required to make the supply chain work. And so we can live in harmony with the technology. Again, technology is an enabler, not a replacer. And so if you build your processes properly and those repeatable processes that are susceptible to high error rates, yes, we need to replace the people that do those transactions with technology. But then the people need to understand what are the analytics telling me and using that to forward the business. Does that make sense?
Yeah,
I mean,
completely.
Absolutely. And I was wondering about what you just described, the shift from a very kind of conventional logistics skill set and mindset in supply chain towards this more data-driven approach. I want to break that down a little bit and ask, where do you think the industry is now in terms of having those skills? What is needed if potentially there aren't the right skills or in the right number to enable some of these technologies to start to take hold? And then what can we do about it?
It's interesting that you bring that up, because all the surveys that we're doing here, that our research is doing here at the school, and plus the research that I looked at, shows that only about 55% of the companies are really even have a strategy for digitization. So then when you look at that, then we're already in supply chain. There is already a talent shortage, a big talent shortage. For every last year, it was for every 3 positions, there was only 1 person to fill it. A latest survey has come out that by the end of this year, for every 9 open positions, there will only be 2 people to fill it.
Wow.
So and there's a couple of reasons for that. One is because the economy is doing well, obviously. Now, when I talk about supply chain positions, I'm not including warehouse workers.
Right.
I'm talking about meaningful job planners, buyers, purchasing. So those kind of jobs. So we already have a talent shortage. So now you bring this whole digital environment. Yeah. And now we have a skill set challenge. So you've got the talent shortage and the skill set gap. And that's where we all have to try to start working together and coming up with strategies of how do we bridge those two? How do we do a skills gap assessment within our organization and then have a strategy to close those gaps?
Well, it sounds like we've got 2 issues to address, right? So we've got the existing staffing that people have within their businesses. How do you prepare them for the future? And how do you hire, or what kind of talents do you hire for the supply chain of the future? So what does that look like?
Unfortunately, right now we're seeing a vicious circle because there's a shortage of talent in supply chain. So typically what companies are doing now is they're saying, Tim, you're now going to be the head of supply chain, but you've never worked in supply chain. You're an engineer.
I'll give it a go.
And we're seeing this trend within business. Then all of a sudden, when things start falling apart, they either blame the technology or they invest in new technology to try and fix a problem that was created by not having the right skill set. Yeah. So that's what's existing. So then what happens when you try to fix it and you go to a CFO or a chief operating officer and say, we've got to fix this, they say, and we need some investment in intellectual capital, and we need investment probably in technology down the road. They say, no, we've invested enough money in technology, you need to work with it. Saying, well, but we have a talent problem. And this is where folks don't understand, is that it starts with the people, and we're putting the wrong people in the wrong places. Okay. And so we've got to pull back a little bit and come up with what I call a really a good talent development strategy for recruiting, developing, and retaining. The latest statistics I've seen is that Millennial and Gen Z, the two basically under 35, that they, if they are not fulfilled in their job within 12 months, some of it 6 months, they're going to leave.
Yeah.
So we may be able to recruit them, but then we fail.
How to keep them?
Failing miserably on retaining them.
What we hear increasingly is you need the right story to tell talented young people. I mean, let's say you're a talented graduate from TCU or MIT, potentially established industry, as we might call it, doesn't hold the same appeal compared to Facebook, Google, all the big players who at the moment are cherry picking the most talented young.
But it's not just that. It's not just that. It's also the fact that I think they, like you said, Dave, they need to feel fulfilled. So perhaps maybe in our generation, it was when you looked for a job right out of college, you knew you needed a good salary, you needed a good benefits, you needed a good stable career that might last you a long time. Kids these days aren't looking necessarily for that. That's not the boxes that need to be ticked.
That's true. That's true. The criteria.
No. And here's the dilemma that we're faced with is that these students that are graduating, going into the industry, who are their bosses? Their bosses are baby boomers or others that are still in their own thought process. I was speaking to a bunch of people, folks, and these were finance people, not too long ago, and I talked about this this whole talent issue in millennial behavior. The bottom line is millennials want the same as we want. It's just differently. And so one person came up and said, they're all going to change. They're going to be just like us. When they get a mortgage and have kids, I said, that's the attitude that's turning away good talent.
Yeah.
If what we have to embrace is the fact that they want the same goals that we want, they just do it differently.
Yeah.
Well,
we have to accept that.
Dave, the world is changing. If you think about it, there are companies now. I mean, millennials these days don't necessarily get saddled with marriage, kids, mortgages. You know, you see these people walking around what's called renting in there's different ways to rent. What I'm getting at is that the economy has changed in such a way that it offers so many different opportunities that perhaps we didn't have, that are beyond the traditional sort of mortgage kid.
But here's something that we can do that I have done in my career, and that I think other companies should do. I had a organization, part of my organization, 250 people, and the average tenure of those employees was about 25 years.
Okay.
So that's average.
Yeah.
So most of them, there were no one under 10 years.
Yeah.
Absolutely none.
Wow.
So when I told my director, I said, we're changing. We're going to change the picture here. I want you, and this is where we partnered with TCU.
Yeah.
I said, I want you to partner with TCU, and we're going to hire graduates, and we're going to sprinkle them in the organization. And in the pod, and it was a pod of 4 people, I said, we're going to make sure we have 1 or 2 of them that are graduates from the university. And of course, it was almost mutiny at doing that. I mean, we're going to get rid of all of our expertise. I said, no, let's try that. So we did that, and we ended up hiring about 35, 40 young people to come in there, and some of them were employees that I already had that were high potentials, and we sprinkled them in. And you know what the result was? The senior people with long tenure people learned how to do things that they never knew they could do.
That's interesting.
When it came time of working on the computer and navigating through order entry, navigating through all the different things, the young person was able to come in and show them how to navigate through that. Mm-hmm. And then the young folks that were there, they learned maturity.
Yeah.
That they learned maturity and tolerance. And so by meshing those two together, there's a perfect example of taking a long-term employees, new employees, and working in harmony. And guess what? We had the best results in that group that we've ever had, and it continued that way. And a lot of the young people only stayed there, and then I got criticized because they said, you've got a 35% turnover in that group. I said, yeah. Complete turnover every 3 years now. Yeah. I said, that's what I want.
Yeah.
And they said, but that's too high of a turnover. No. I said, but every single one of those employees are going to another job within the organization to advance their career. Mm-hmm. So when we've recruited, we've embraced the recruitment, and we retained them. So, and that's why
I've got a question for you with regards to supply chain and HR. Previously these are, because you're just talking about recruiting, retaining, you're talking about how to manage millennials. How close are you seeing the alignment between HR and supply chain compared to, say, 10 years ago?
It's a lot better. It was a battle because it used to be, well, we handle hiring. I said, no, the business does. You are a partner in this. And we were able to build a pretty good partnership with HR. It worked really well on recruiting. It worked really well in programs that I rolled out. Where it starts falling apart is when you start, and I don't want to totally bash HR folks here, but they want to put formality around things that shouldn't be formal. A mentoring program, for example.
Okay.
A mentoring program I encourage, and when I talk to students, when I talk to young professionals, because I do young professional workshop, I said you should have a mentor at the place you work at, a mentor outside of the organization that you can talk to. Well, it's got to be informal. It's got to be an informal, and it's got to be just a dialogue. Well, then all of a sudden, someone decides that they want to have a formal mentoring program.
Right.
Now, quite frankly, I've not seen formal mentoring programs sustain themselves.
Why is that?
Well, because now it's more of a reporting exercise. You have to have a meeting every so often. You have to record the meeting. And I'm saying, no, I'm here and I mentor about 5 or 6 young people around the world, believe it or not. I've got one in Europe, one in Asia, and one in Canada, and a few here. And I'm here when you need me. I'm not, and every once in a while I'll shoot them an email and say, how are you doing? And if I don't hear from them, fine. But when you have a formal program, they say, well, no, you've got to meet every month. You've got to document that meeting. What are the takeaways? When's your next meeting? No. I'm sorry, but I think
becomes too rigid. Becomes too rigid, doesn't it?
Yeah, it's too rigid in millennials, believe it or not.
Yeah.
In younger folks, they don't like that.
Yeah.
They love flexibility.
Yeah.
And they love flexibility. I'm sorry.
I was going to say, what's your experience in how much of this kind of thing is going on at the moment? Sounds like lots of these kind of schemes get kicked off and then fall by the wayside. Do you think the profession generally, and I know it's a broad term, is good at nurturing and sort of taking younger, talented people under their wings and bringing them on, or do they still see it as a more sort of transactional relationship where it's, you have the skills I need, we'll pay you, and there it's left?
I think it's mixed, Tim. I think, when you start looking at the digital transformation of supply chain, and I look at the 5 stages and where you're at in those stages, and the winners, the companies that really are integrated and they're embracing their talent, and they've got a good, robust talent management program, and the leaders, the results in those companies tend to be higher than companies that are not doing it. And it's not industry specific either. I think across all industries, you've got those companies that are really, really focusing on how am I going to build my intellectual capital, my talent, in order to manage this transformation, are going to continue to be more successful than the others. Look, you can just look at some of the retail. And you can go back on the way that the retail is embracing new behaviors, and those who are really embracing it are now becoming very successful. Mm-hmm. The others that have not are obviously left behind. It goes back to, I tell companies all the time, who's your customer? And they'll say, and I said, your customer is not the baby boomer, even though they still got a lot of buying power. Mm-hmm. I mean, your customer is the millennials and others. Yeah. So who is your future employees? The fact of the matter is that you still have a mass exodus of senior leaders in companies, especially in supply chain. Yeah. We've got senior leaders because they're over 50 years old. And so when they hit 55 or or 60, they're leaving.
Yeah, we've got an aging workforce, don't we? That's
absolutely. And even in supply chain is pretty bad. And so we don't have that succession of future leaders coming through because we're so far behind. And I'll give you an example that if you really think people, and you're always thinking people, and that's how I engaged with TCU 16 years ago, because I had a talent problem and I was thinking people. I had a young person we hired from Staples, which is a office supply company here in the United States, and he was an analyst. And I'm a firm believer, a supply chain leader, you have to spend 75% of your time on people, seeing your people, talking to them. So it used to drive my assistant crazy. I'd be gone for 2 hours because I'm around talking to people. So I went to this one individual and just sat down and just chatted with him. So I came back and spoke to his boss. And I said, there is a talent that's being wasted.
Right.
He was an analyst, just an analyst sitting there, an individual contributor. I said, we've got to put him on a fast track. I'll fast forward for the interest of time. So I implemented what I call a rotational assignment program, put him in that program, and he elevated from that analyst to a chief operating officer for a company in a span of 10 years.
Wow.
And so now if we just take that model and look at where is our high potential talent. But you know what the problem is in supply chain? We're tactical people. We're tactical people. We're firefighters.
Yeah.
So we get caught into the day-to-day and putting out the fires, and we forget that we should be managing our people. Yeah. The other problem we've got is that when there's a mess up, that we try and find the person, and we got to try and fix it ourselves instead of allowing and engaging your people to do that. So I tell supply chain leaders, back off. Don't be so tactical. You've got to be more strategic. You've got to have trust in your people. They say, well, I don't have the right people. Then get the right people.
Yeah. This is taking us into a really interesting area, which is the role of the supply chain function within the organization today, and then also its role in innovation and leading the organization into the future, whether that's driving e-commerce or direct-to-consumer, or the way that supply chain integrates with marketing and sales to create, a new customer experience. Some of these are big trends that are completely aligned with organizational success. They're not small elements of a cost center that supply chain maybe was in the past. So how do you see the need for the function to reposition itself within organizations?
Okay, because I want to back up and I'll ask you guys a couple of questions. How many different certifications are there for accountants?
Probably 25 in the UK alone, I should imagine. It does.
For accountants, no. I mean, there's only one or two certifications.
Okay, so you're either CPA or you're either a financial manager. Yeah, I get it.
Yeah, and for finance, there's only one or two.
Yeah.
Do you know how many there are in supply chain? Last time I counted, I stopped counting at 30.
Wow.
30 different certifications, and you got the three big ones, of course, from Apex, ISM, and CSCMP.
Yeah.
So now if you're a young person and you want to pick a career, what are you going to pick? No one knows. I mean, we did a survey of 250 supply chain executives and asked them to define supply chain. Do you know how many answers we got? We got 200 different variations.
Wow. So
first problem is we don't know how to define supply chain. I do. I look at it as a plan, source, make, deliver, return, sustain, and the data and moving material that goes into that. Yeah. But a lot of people don't know. So if I'm a young person and want to pick a career, I know what marketing is. I know what finance is.
Easy to define.
And I know accounting is, but I don't know what supply chain is.
Well, let me ask you, Dave. I mean, when you're growing up and you're in high school and you're going, we've talked about this before, haven't we? Where, if you're in your guidance counselor's office, is supply chain or manufacturing, are those viable options for a career for young people?
It's not seen as a profession. It's just seen as a cluster.
I'm glad you bring that up because I was talking to some high school counselors.
Okay.
And you know what they tell these students? If you go into manufacturing or logistics, you don't need a degree.
Right.
And I'm saying, are you crazy? I said, first of all, there are now excellent schools for supply chain degrees. And at least the university community is starting to get consensus on the definition of supply chain. So the great manufacturing, the way manufacturing right now is technology driven. You obviously need a degree. So we have a problem in the United States with our high school counselors. We're not educating them enough as to what it's not logistics, it's supply chain. It's how I defined it. So we have a problem. We have a problem in messaging supply chain.
Yeah.
When I meet with students and I meet with freshmen, and we have this camp where all the open house where all of the freshmen and their parents come in, and I put up a booth on supply chain. And so I asked the parents, I said, are you thinking about supply chain major? They said, well, we don't know what it is. Mm-hmm. I said, did you buy anything lately? They said, yes. I said, everything that goes behind that is supply chain, including the data. Plus the fact is that I can guarantee you're going to have a job when you get your degree because we have a shortage. Now, if you get your supply chain degree along with your BIS degree, double major, you're guaranteed 150% of getting a job. Mm-hmm. You can't say that in the others.
So that's interesting that because we're talking about hiring people into supply chain. So we have an image problem that's got to be dealt with in terms of the image of supply chain as a job in and of itself. Then you've got perhaps maybe hiring issues at the companies themselves where they maybe do you think they realize that they need young people into the new supply chain? That's one question. The next question is, have they defined, or is there a way to define what the new role of supply chain looks like? So do you want more data science people? Do you want people with more analytics skills?
A couple things on that is, first of all, there are some companies, progressive companies, that really understand that they need younger people in their organization. Yeah. Let me talk a little bit about the 3PL, third-party logistics. And I'm working with about 5 or 6. I've got two of them right now that hire a lot of our students. Okay. Not only do they hire them, but they put them on rotational, and they understand. And guess where those two companies are relative to the competition? They're going up. Yeah. So there are companies across various industries that are seeing the need to really partner with universities and hire young graduates. But that itself is not going to solve the problem because there's too many gaps. So now you've got to go to young professionals that have 2 to 5 years experience. And this is where, if they don't want to go back to school to get a supply chain degree, this is where the certifications come in handy. But going after them and embracing them to bring them into the supply chain organization, understanding that the skill sets that are now required is still going to be those soft skills. I always believe that in supply chain, it's the soft skills that exceed the technical. I tell folks all the time, I can teach the technical. I can teach that, but I cannot teach you your attitude and in some of the leadership skills. I'll give you an example. I pulled a person out that worked 25 years in research and development that couldn't even spell supply chain. and moved her over and put her as global head of my sales and operational planning process. A remarkable success. I paid for her to go back at her executive MBA. Her and I spent a lot of time on talking about, what does this mean? What's the sales and operational planning process? What's this? And did exceptionally well. And she moved on to greater things. So from a skill set standpoint, if you're looking at future supply chain leaders, it's more on communication, relationship building, collaboration, trust. Trust to me is the number one thing. The ability to get things done through others, and a very high learning agility. And what I mean by learning agility is your political agility, being able to navigate through because supply chain people, when something goes wrong, it's always supply chain. So you've got to be able to navigate through that. Results agility, that your results are going to exceed what the company wants all the time. Your people agility, understanding cultural sensitivity, understanding that you're going to have different people from different cultures. You're going to have different behaviors. You're going to have some that are going to be really good, some that aren't going to be really bad. And how do you do that? And your change agility. Are you able to facilitate change? I tell people all the time, I said in supply chain, you've got to have the philosophy, if it isn't broken, you break it, fix it, and break it again.
Okay.
Because it's got to be a theory and a philosophy of continuous improvement. So if we're going to go down the digitization of your supply chain, what's got to change? Your processes have to change. And if you don't change your processes and you just bring new technology in there, you're going to fail.
Well, that's where you get a lot of companies with shelfware that end up spending tons of money on new tech, and they just sit on a shelf somewhere, or create legacy systems that perhaps don't work, because this is what we're talking about. The processes are broken, the people are broken, but hey, you got shiny new tech.
I spoke to a guy who was working in 3D printing, funny enough, and he would go into organizations and he would see coffee rings on top of the 3D printing units because they basically bought an expensive coffee table. They didn't know what to do with it. They bought it because it seemed like a good idea. It wasn't integrated into their strategy. They didn't have any kind of long-term plans. And you can see this pitfall opening up for lots of organizations.
So here's the challenge, Dave, though. We keep talking about hiring millennials and bringing millennials in, but maybe the problem also lies with management today. I mean, what you pointed out is a fantastic way to try to get more out of your existing people and have that sort of agility. What is being done, or is anything being done to address existing management structures today?
Well, you have to get out of the way. I mean, they have to get out of the way. I retired in 2014. I got out of the way.
Yeah.
I mean, at some point in time in your career, you become a blocker.
Yeah.
You're the blocker and being able to progress in the organization. But what companies do with supply chain execs, like they do with all their executives, they handcuff them. They make it difficult for them to leave. But you got to get out of the way. And you've got to have the tenacity and the courage. Courage is another thing you've got to have in supply chain, of making those tough decisions, saying you are a blocker. Yeah. I'll give you another example. I had a director that his organization, it sucked. I mean, it did not. I mean, and I put it in his review. I said, yeah, it is. It's a technical. I said, I said, you have a terrible organization. Yeah. I mean, the people have been there forever. They're caught in their own ways. I can't seem to get change in there. My goodness, he was so upset. And I mean, and he's a baby boomer. He's older than I am. And within 8 months, he flipped his organization.
Wow. It
became the most progressive, fast-moving organization. Then he said, now it's time for me to get out of the way. And now he moved out of the way, and he's, 67 years old, and moved in and turned the reins over to a 36-year-old.
Wow.
But how do you make everyone make that same leap? That's one of the challenges, right? Not everyone's as self-aware, maybe.
I think there's also an element of, we talk about how the C-level is the one that's driving digital transformation at the moment, right? So the C-suite is the one that's really pushing that. But I think probably they're looking for sort of a silver bullet type of solution, aren't they? And that's usually behind tech, because they're not willing to make the spend on fixing the processes, right?
Yeah, we spoke to
here's the error, I think. Yes, you're right. C-suite is driving digital transformation. And so they hire one of the big consulting companies to come in and say, give me a roadmap for digital transformation. And then all of a sudden, they don't do a people skill assessment, gap assessment. They don't do a process. I'm still seeing this, Tim and Maria, in ERP implementations.
Wow.
where they don't look at their processes. And they wedge it in, and then you blame the technology for failing. I say, it's not the technology, it's your processes.
Yeah.
But then I go back from the beginning of this. It's people. The people build the processes.
Yeah.
Guess what happens if people leave? The processes break.
Yeah.
Unless you have enabling technology to keep those processes running. Mm-hmm. What digitization in supply chain does is takes your processes such as the buying process, which everyone says is very common. It's a repeatable process. I mean, people shouldn't be doing it. I'm a firm believer. Buyers, that you shouldn't be placing purchase orders. Yeah. That's something that technology can take care of. Yeah. But now what the buyer is an analyst, a commodity analyst that uses analytics, both descriptive and predictive analytics, to determine what is going to happen in that commodity, what's going to happen in the future, and that's the transition of the skill set. When you explain that to young people, they gravitate to it, saying, no, you're not going to do these mundane, repeatable jobs. That's where technology enables the process. What you're going to do now is you're going to be analysts. You're going to analyze the crap out of everything.
Yeah.
And hopefully that we get from the point of predictive analytics. I said, you've got real opportunity as a young person coming in supply chain, going in as an analyst, that being able to use the data that you've got. And we're now going to edge computing, which means everything is really, really coming fast. Yeah. And you're going to be able to take that, and you know what? You're going to be able to prescribe solutions. You're going to be able to turn those predictive analytics into prescriptive analytics, and you're going to be a change agent for the company.
Mm-hmm. Well,
they love that.
I love it. I think, I think the way that you're describing it right now is perhaps a way that companies can use to repackage how supply chain is viewed as a potential career opportunity.
Yeah. If you're talking about, you're going to be predicting the future, you're going to be the person that delights millions of customers because you're the guy that makes sure that the product is in stock on Amazon, is in stock on the e-commerce platform, that gets it to them within.
But
that's incredible.
And not only that, but now you're going to be in a position that there's over 220 disasters that happen every year that impacts the supply chain to a cost globally of about $285 billion in disruption due to natural disasters. Well, now, I'm saying this whole area of risk mitigation, supply chain risk, but people don't like talking about, but I say, can you imagine having an analyst, being the analyst that's using a technology such as ESRI or geolocating technology to help you make decisions on how to reroute freight or reroute your supply chain? Oh my goodness, and being able to look at a dashboard and being able to move it around, that's exciting. It's sexy now. Supply chain now is sexy. Yeah. And we could never say that before. But here's the problem. It's fear.
Yeah.
In organizations, it's the fear of change, because we're talking about this technology, digitization, blockchain, and on blockchain, my head is blowing up from all this blockchain. And it's fear that everyone thinks their job is going to be eliminated.
Well,
everyone thinks their jobs are going to be eliminated.
It's not just fear of the jobs are going to be changed or whatever, or eliminated completely. It's also the fact that silver bullet thing again, that this is the answer. This is the holy grail that's going to solve all my supply chain woes. It means nothing. There is no point in implementing any of that stuff if you don't address the fundamental issues.
We had a conversation last week, and someone made reference to the Airline Magazine School of Management, which is a senior member of the organization gets pitched with a technology or some magic solution, and they parachute it into the organization without working it into the culture or the change management or making sure the people are aligned to it. And lo and behold, it doesn't work. So this whole idea now of supply chain integrating throughout the organization with every function is got to be critical to success.
Yeah, and I do believe that so if you from an organizational design perspective, that I believe in global governance, local execution.
Okay.
So from a supply chain standpoint, that you've got to make sure that your processes are as global as possible, but the executing of those processes need to be done by region. Shipping to Indiana in the U.S. is quite different than shipping to India.
Yeah.
The market in UK is substantially different than the market in even France.
Yeah.
So the way you execute the global governance is going to differ between each company. That's important to understand. But a lot of people say we're going to, and this is where the caution is on this embedding supply chain in the organizations. If you embed the supply chain within different organizations, you still have the functional silos. And then the supply chain becomes part of that functional silo. Supply chain is the only function that has to look at the business horizontally.
Okay.
And so when you have to look at it horizontally, you've got to have that global governance, but you've got to allow them to execute. The customers are different in UK than the United States. The customers are different in France, or customers are different in Italy, and customers certainly are different in Asia. So because what you should be doing is everything should be done for the customer, but the processes fundamentally don't change. It's the execution of the process, if that makes sense to you. Yeah. Then the technology needs to enable those processes. Now, my supply chain people embedded within the different organizations, what are they? They're analysts. They are now analyzing the local market, looking at the descriptive analytics, which is historical, looking at my predictive analytics, and now looking at what can I do in the future, and transmitting that electronically into a global dashboard that I can sit here as a senior leader in the C-suite and say, in UK, that here's some areas of opportunity in our in some of the inefficiencies that we can fix by doing a couple things. Here is in India where we can fix a couple things. So what happens is your supply chain people become analysts to look at inefficiencies in the supply chain. It's the Herbie effect, if you ever read The Goal, that your supply chain is only as good as the weakest link.
Yeah.
There's always a weakest link. That's when I say, if it isn't broken, break it. Always find the weakest link. Fix the weakest link and move on. That's what supply chain skill sets are going to be in the future.
Dave, a couple of things. I mean, just to maybe look at some practical guidelines and practical advice for some of our members. What can they do now? I mean, you've got the millennials right there in your university. You're talking to them. When choosing the next supply chain job, what kind of companies are they looking for? What kind of environments should they have? So in other words, what can the supply chain director of today do to entice people to come to their businesses from a hiring perspective, and then also from a retaining perspective?
Yeah, a couple of things. First of all, the young folks now, the undergrads, they'll work for any industry. They'll work anywhere in the world, work for any industry. That's what I love about the students today. I mean, they will go anywhere in the world. It's more of a cultural fit. And when I say cultural fit, is it a company that's always moving forward? And is the culture is the organization one that really does have value for their people?
Yeah.
But you know what I'm seeing coming out the most? Are they, do they have a sustainability policy?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Is there a sustainability? What we're seeing buying behaviors of millennials, and by the way, millennials don't like that term, but anyhow, of people under 35, or in 35, their buying behavior is, they're not as price sensitive as we think they are. But if they know that it's been made with clean resources,
they'll spend more money on that.
Without child labor, then they'll buy it. So my communication to them is saying, okay, I said, and that's part of my definition of supply chain is all the way the supplier's supplier to the customer's customer, and everything in between.
Yeah.
So So in order for companies to attract that, they've got to have this culture, first of all, that they're going to accept change, that they're not rigid they want flexible work hours. They can accomplish more in 2 hours than what you and I can do in 4 or 5.
Yeah.
And that's just a matter of fact. And because we do busy work. They just get on to it. And so having an environment where they're accepted, mm-hmm. that if they want to have a mentor, that's easy to get a mentor, that there's some flexibility, paid time off and stuff like that. They'll put the hours in, but having that flexibility and just the work environment, they work very well, by the way, in an open environment, mm-hmm. yeah. where there's no offices there. It doesn't bother them at all. Sure. And so that becomes really, it's more the social atmosphere becomes.
Yeah. For what we've heard increasingly is that they would describe that as what's the story you're telling to people coming, potentially wanting to join your company. Don't think so much around job descriptions and tasks and outcomes. Those are all going to be there, of course, but that's not the way you go to market to attract young talent. You need a mission statement, you need a narrative that sits behind that. And it might sound slightly sort of nebulous, but actually those are fundamental parts of a company anyway. If your company doesn't have a sustainability policy, then something's probably not right there. So it can be a driver to kind of get certain aspects of the company culture.
But what's even more important is where can I be in 2 years?
So what skills can you get? What can I acquire in those 2 years? What am I going to get out? Because what you're saying is that to some degree, their lifespan within a company may be short. Their contribution may be great, but equally they want to take something out of that. And I think maybe that's something that employers need to look at too.
Yeah.
Our older mentality is to hire someone to be there with you for 10, 15 years.
I can remember, probably 10 years ago, if you were in a job for less than 2 years,
it was frowned upon.
Like a black mark on your kind of resume, right?
We are seeing that the younger folks have very low tolerance for office politics. And so if the office politics gets severe, and every office has politics, you can't get around it, they'll leave.
Yeah.
Yeah, I've experienced it where I've had people leave in some of my organizations. They just decided, I just don't like working here anymore. Because I talked to them and said, no, I just don't. I said, what are you going to do? I said, well, I'm going to travel. But so we've got to understand that what motivates them is a little bit different. I had one person that, he had 2 kids and a wife, but just did not like the environment and quit.
The other thing is that I think these companies, these long established, large multinational businesses, which is what we're talking about here, that have complicated supply chains, they used to be the best places to work at, right? That's where you aspired to. I want to work at that company or this company because they're going to give me a great career.
You've got the firepower.
Exactly. You've got stability, right? Mm-hmm. Whereas nowadays you get these disruptive little companies that just start up, or more importantly, you can start up your own company, and you've got you've got people in the, again, millennial, or however you want to call them, the below 35, that have their own companies where they're in control of their own mission. So these larger companies are having to compete with that.
It's interesting. The data is showing that size doesn't matter.
Yeah.
So those companies that come out of the gate with a very good view, and it's kind of there's a lot of startups. There's people under 35 starting companies. They're digitized right at the beginning.
Yeah.
They launched digitized.
Built around it. Yeah. They
are taking 25% market share from the competition in that product that they're coming out. So we've got to understand that there are a lot. The big companies are too complex, and they're so complex. It's like moving a mountain, what you can. But so there's a philosophy out there that some of these Fortune 100 companies have got to now start starting to go into smaller segments and start looking at themselves in smaller segments and not trying to be a behemoth in the industry, because we're seeing that startup companies, as they come in, they're fully digitized, which means that yes, they've got a lot of investment in technology, but they got robust processes, and they only need 3 people to run it.
Yeah. Well, see,
so they become more economical.
Well, that's the other thing that we were talking about previously in terms of where you have employed younger people in your groups before. They've taught the older generation a couple of tricks, right? So how to navigate certain things. Yep. But that's, I think, what they can bring to the table, because there might be supply chain directors now thinking, oh man, do I really want to get into hiring millennials? Do I really want to do all this? Because it sounds like such a headache to have to try to do this with my business. My business is, but yet, here's what I was going to say is, if you don't bring these types of people into your business to teach you the agile way of thinking, then they will not be able to teach you the disruptive type of, processes, the disruptive thinking to look at problems in a different way, which will then mean you're less likely to compete against the agile, disruptive startups. Would you agree?
Yeah, you said something key there, Maria, is disruptive thinking. And we got to start with disruptive thinking. I think that's the phrase you used. And we've got to look at, let's not worry about the disruptive technology right now.
Yes.
What about our disruptive thinking? And in order to get disruptive thinking, you're going to have the right people in the right places. That's where you got to start before you even talk about using disruptive technology. But unfortunately, it's cool to have that technology. That's the way some companies are looking at it. I've got to get into the drones. I've got to have some of this technology. Yeah. And their thinking is still behind. Yeah. And so you've got to have the disruptive thinking first. And then you've got to have people in those. I'll give you another example. This whole area, another huge shortage is truck drivers.
Yeah.
No doubt, globally. There is a shortage of truck drivers. And I told a group one time, I said, look, for the last 10 years, I've been hearing about truck driver shortage. I said, I'm tired of hearing about it. Do something about it. But I said, now, take autonomous trucks. And, and they're driverless trucks. Mm-hmm. I said, that would be cool for someone that just came out of the Air Force. And he's still early in his 20s.
Yeah.
Because he's now sitting in this thing that looks like a spaceship.
Wire mentality, yeah.
Yeah,
and he can sit there and play on his laptop while there, and then only drive when he has to. I said, that's going to be appealing to some of these people. Why aren't we going after that? And I said, you've got to take away some of the other things like loading the trucks and stuff like that. Take that away from the driver. But there is a possible solution. Yeah. And where you're taking the people and the technology together, you're changing the process in the sense that I'm not going to require that driver to load and unload the truck anymore. That's going to be done by the customer or by the shipper. Yeah. And now you've created something that could be cool.
Yeah, we've spoken to automotive leaders who are as interested in hiring younger people with video game playing experience to work in automotive production as much as they are engineers, because they understand the mentality and the interface with technology in a far more intuitive way than somebody who's built around physical engineering and parts moving and this kind of stuff. So that lateral thinking, that disruptive thinking.
I'll give you an example of a progressive company. I'm working with a company. The company is 180 years old.
Right.
But they have now, they have gone in and they have turned their supply chain upside down, where now they're marketing their supply chain as a profit center.
Right, okay.
And they're partnering with us here at TCU to bring 4 students in every single semester to work on a lean initiative project that's going to bring value to the entire supply chain, that will move over, that they can market it to the other divisions within the company and outside, that here is a new solution. And what a smart idea, because they're bringing juniors in. And running these workshops for 2 or 3 days. The students are running the workshops on these lean initiatives to really drive the inefficiencies out of the supply chain. And they're going to get 4 students every semester. You know why they're using students?
Why?
Because they're not blinded by the current processes.
Okay, that's a really interesting point that you mentioned. One of the things our members mention all the time is, well, we're big business, we've got legacy systems and processes that have been ingrained in our business for I don't know how many years. So maybe that's what's needed. You're laughing, but that's exactly it. Is that yes or no? They say they've got my processes. Some of our processes date back.
Can't turn the tanker that fast.
Yeah, we can't move that quickly. But that agile thinking, that disruptive thinking, is what's needed. But yet they're going to have a culture in their business to welcome that kind of thinking, because
and I don't buy any of this. We've got these legacy processes, we got these legacy systems, and that's the only way that's going to, it's been working. Why do anything with it? It's been working. I say to that, I said, well, then maybe we should have listened to Henry Ford and said, yes, you can have any color as long as it's black.
Yeah.
With that mentality.
Yeah.
Or we look at new processes and throw out the legacy processes, throw out the legacy systems. Is it painful? Absolutely. Change is very painful. It's scary and it's painful. But if we don't change, I tell students, I said change is the only constant we have. The supply chain you see today is going to be 180 degrees different next year at this time.
So therefore, the skills that you need have to come from people that are agile enough to adapt to that kind of change.
Exactly. And I'll suggest to you that those companies that have that attitude are going to be the winners, and their results are going to be much better. Then I'll give you an example. I talked to another company. I brought a student in because he really wanted to work for this company. And so I went with him. He's one of our Master of Science students in supply chain. And he said, I like the way he said, well, we don't hire university grads. You got to start down on the floor and work your way up. And it's going to take you 3 years. And you could see him just deflate. So when I left, I said, look, this company is doing well right now because the economy is doing well. I mean, we're going to see here in the United States 4.5% GDP. I said, the minute the economy slows down, they're going to go like this. And their competitor who I work with, who is embracing young talent, hiring them out of university, putting them into a leadership management role, and yes, they have to work in these different functions, but they're in the leadership cycle. They're going to go like this. But when you still compare the growth of this company that's you got it there, and the growth of this company is still quite different. And the people we're talking to, they've been with the company 30 years. It's ingrained in their mind. This is the way I did it.
Exactly.
That's the way everyone else has to do it. Baloney. I mean, no, you've got these young people, they have so much energy. We put on here a case competition, a graduate program for MBA, MS, and supply chain. We invite the top 25 supply chain schools in the nation. We only accept 16 teams. And when you see these teams come in and they get the case on a Friday morning and they've got 24 hours to come up with a solution, and you see the way these teams of 4 from these different universities, the talent we have out there, Tim and Maria, is unbelievable. It's unbelievable the talent we've got. Why aren't we embracing?
So what is the impediment? What's stopping this talent getting through to leadership positions today?
All of the above.
People like me, or people that were in positions like mine, that won't get out of the way.
Okay.
There are blockers.
Yeah.
And that don't recognize the importance of the people. That's the people that build the processes, and that technology is only there to enable it. And then because, again, it goes back to what I said, supply chain leaders, some of them are put in that position because of their vast knowledge of supply chain. One of the things I also did with my leadership team, and it would frustrate them, I'd rotate them, put them in an area that they knew nothing about, and they'd be very successful. And the reason why I did that is because, again, it's not, you can teach the technical. So if you're put in a position where you can't get into the weeds because you don't know the weeds, you're more inclined to strategize and to understand that they are going to have to get it done, and I'm going to just give them guidance and clear the way, clear the politics. Yeah. When you do that, then you're embracing talent and you're embracing the people. But unfortunately, we have a lot of leaders that are extremely knowledgeable. I've worked in all parts of the supply chain too, and I know supply chain forwards and backwards and sideways, up and down. And so if I had to get in the weeds, I could, but you can't. And because then you lose focus on building talent, and your primary purpose as a leader should be building talent.
Well, I think that's a good point at which maybe to reflect and draw together the conversation, because I think leaders think they know what they know and that it's the right thing to do, but increasingly they need to almost unlearn some of their deep tactical knowledge, or at least put it to one side, move into a more strategic
or
place.
Acknowledge the changing face of the economy right now, the changing face of business, the changing pace of things. So, Dave, any parting advice for the supply chain manufacturing leaders of today?
The only thing, focus your efforts on really building an organization for the future. And the future could be as near as next year, because the supply chain is going to change. Yeah. And build an organization that's really focused on the right skill sets, the right people that can really build your processes for the future, that can build the footprint for digital supply chain. Don't assume a footprint. Let the people build that footprint, and then go down the digital journey based upon that footprint and that blueprint for digital transformation, instead of just buying the technology and thinking it's going to do it for you.
Well, that's a fantastic message, I think, to draw things to a close. Dave, thanks so much for joining us. I think we've had a really interesting conversation. Yes. Some interesting philosophical ideas, some practical ideas, some looks at the future and the present day.
I think we've solved the world's problems, to be honest, in this segment. What do you think?
I think we have.
Come close to it anyway.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, thank you very much, Dave, for this. Hopefully I'm sure we'll catch you very soon.
Yeah, thank you. Take care now.